Okay, so we're talking about the things that are taking place between the two wars that are eventually going to lead us into World War II. We started out talking about the rise of fascism and how fascism kind of got hold, particularly in Italy, with a guy named Benito Mussolini, and then was kind of used by a man named Adolf Hitler to take control of Germany. We also said that one of the major causes of World War II was the Great Depression. And we talked about all the different ways in which the Great Depression kind of began and what were the main leading causes of that. Now, there was a slide that we talked about that gave 4 major reasons. If you were to get a short response on that, that would be the slide to kind of turn to about the causes of the Great Depression and the impact of it. But we said ultimately all 4 of those causes shared a common link, which was that all of those causes that we listed had something to do with the fact that banks were giving out loans that eventually don't get repaid, and which caused those banks to go bankrupt. And when the banks went bankrupt, the entire economic system in the United States collapsed because there was nothing holding it together. And we call that an economic bubble, where something had been built up and built up and built up, but on the outside it looks solid, but on the inside it's nothing but air. And if you poke it in the wrong way, it bursts and there's nothing left, right? It's not a solid ball of matter, it's a bubble. And so if you pop the bubble, there's nothing left in the middle. And that's why it's called a bubble, okay? So you have to understand that this idea of, the banking was really the bubble, and those other pieces were really just the dominoes that when one of them gets tipped over, it kind of tipped the whole thing over, bust the bubble, Great Depression. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a couple more things that are going to look to continue to build up towards World War II. The first of those is going to be Japan, and then a couple more other factors that we're going to look at from that pinwheel on the very first slide of this module. And so we're going to look at Japan and how Japan starts to grow and desire more power and influence, and then we're going to turn and look back at Hitler and see what are some of his early moves that are going to push Europe back into war. So Japanese expansion is really, motivated simply by 2 major ideas. And we talked about imperialism a few modules back, right? That Japan was really able to successfully resist imperialism and kind of isolate themselves from the rest of the world. And during this time, they knew that they had to industrialize. Otherwise they were subject to becoming, overruled by European powers. So they want to industrialize their military so that they can resist any military efforts by the outside world, and they want to improve their economy. So they have begun to industrialize. The problem with Japan and industrialization is that Japan is a volcanic island, correct? And as a volcanic island, it has a rich variety of some resources. It's got great agricultural land. We know that it has incredible fishing opportunities all around it. Some of the best, like sushi and fresh fish, come from Japan. They also have wonderful agriculture, like we know their cattle industry is very, very good. There's a section of Japan that has some of what is considered to be the best beef in the world. Are y'all aware of that? Y'all know what it's called? Wagyu, right. Wagyu, to be a Wagyu beef, it must come from the Wagyu area in Japan. That is where those cows are raised because of their diet and the food that's there and the nutrients and the way that they're raised. They are some of the most delicate, morsels of beef in the world. And so we know that they have that. But what they don't have is a lot of minerals. They have no oil reserves. They can't drill for oil there because, again, it's volcanic. They have iron and some of those things, but it's very difficult to get to some of them. No coal to speak of. So in order to industrialize, they're going to need natural resources. And these natural resources are going to be obtained by expanding aggressively into the rest of Asia, particularly China, Southeast Asia, what we would now think of as Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, these areas here. These areas are very are very mineral rich, and they're going to be looking for these raw materials. And so they're actually going to, in 1931, invade a section of China called Manchuria, and then begin a full-on attack, a full-scale war with China in 1937, known as the Sino-Japanese War. Sino would be the Japanese word for China, right? So the Sino-Japanese War. And actually, this is going to, because, you know, Manchuria is right here, and you have Mongolia, and you have northern China. Right up next to that is Russia, the USSR, right? And this is going to essentially invoke the Russians to push back against the Japanese moving in on their territory, what the Russians see as their territory, because the Russians are also using oil and iron and coal and things found in this area. They're also trying to use that. This was, if you'll remember, China was kind of split up into spheres of influence by all the European powers. And this area that the Japanese have attacked is the Russian sphere in China. And so they go to war with China and take land. And then Russia is going to attack Japan because of this. And you're going to get the Soviet-Japanese war. Okay? And so you're going to basically have Japan, who is very, very industrialized, who has a very modern military, kick the crap out of Russia and China. Yeah. So it's pretty impressive. Now, that just kind of understanding that Japan has begun to expand aggressively, okay? Then we're going to get back to the idea of communism and this idea of anti-communism. Now, the 1930s see the rise of many totalitarian regimes, and for the most part, though, people are going to choose fascism over communism. Okay, the idea here is that fascism is a more effective way that, and these fascists who want to become dictators don't want the responsibility of trying to, take care of all the people if they don't want to, which is what communism's whole idea is. They're saying, no, I'd rather just be in charge and tell you what to do. And so these leaders are going to choose these government styles that are going to be, kind of anti-communists. Fascism and communism are the opposite, right? Fascism says one person, one party's in charge of everything. Communism, in its reality, says that everybody's in this together and that we all should have a say in the government and that we all should have the government serve everybody the same. That's not what a dictator is looking to do, right? A dictator wants to be in complete control and doesn't want to share it with anybody. So Adolf Hitler hates communism. He hates the idea of communism, that the people might rise up against their government. And so he is going to really push back against that, and he's going to exploit the people's fear of communists taking over Germany to really gain power. Now, it's not hard to do because you can point to like Stalin in Russia following World War I. You have Stalin who's taken over and done his purge, and it's really awful. But essentially, Hitler is saying communism's bad. Anybody who was a communist was one of the first people rounded up and killed by the Nazi Party. Communists were, even before the Jews, because he saw it as a threat to his power. The Jews he just hated. He didn't fear the Jews because he didn't think anybody would follow, and that the Jews were, kind of docile. They didn't want to go to war to fight, they were kind of naive a little bit, actually, that they did not believe that anybody would ever actually try to exterminate them. So he's not sitting here going, oh, I have to get rid of the Jews or they're going to rise up against me. No, he didn't think that highly of the Jews. He saw them as something that could be exterminated. But what he was afraid of was communism. That if communism caught on, that the people might realize we could just do better for ourselves together. And so the communists were some of the first people executed straight up. And he actually started doing that before he took power. Now, probably the worst part of the buildup to World War II is this idea of appeasement. And it is extremely infuriating that the other world leaders in Europe did this, okay? And essentially, appeasement is basically giving in to an enemy's demands to avoid further conflict, okay? And that's a quiz question. So appeasement is giving in to an enemy's demands because you're trying to avoid conflict with them, okay? So if I give them what they want, then they won't want anything else. So we won't have to go into conflict with each other. And the European leaders are just a couple decades out of World War I, and they don't want to go back to war. They saw how devastating it was, 30 million people dead. They don't want that. And so what they decide they're going to do is basically, as Hitler is rising in power, they're going to say and justify some of the things that he's doing as, well, you know, does it really hurt anything to let him do that? Does it really harm everybody if we let him take over Czechoslovakia? Or if we let him invade Austria? Or if we let him build tanks and weapons and rebuild his army? Does it really hurt anybody? If we let him do it, then he won't be upset and we can avoid war. But in reality, this idea of appeasement is really what led to the Nazis being able to build such a substantial army and causes World War II. Right? So the best case of this is here in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was created after World War I as a kind of ethnic country where you took half of the country that was basically ethnically German, and then you had a bunch of people that were ethnically Slavic, and we said, hey, you have the Czechs and you have the Slavs, and we go, hey, y'all are going to be the same country. And they go, we don't want to be the same country. We want to be two different countries. And today we have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, right? After World War II, that happens. But before that, because it was easier to deal with them as one group, we said, no, you have to be one country. Well, they don't want to be one country. And half of the country actually wants to be back as part of Germany because they were Germans living there. And so after World War I, they said, hey, Germany, you're not allowed to have that territory anymore. We're going to take it from you, even though all those people are German. We're going to force them to be a country with a bunch of people that they don't identify with as their country mates. And there you go. Well, by 1939, Hitler says, we want Czechoslovakia. Those are German people. We're going to absorb them. The problem is the Treaty of Versailles said you're not allowed to have a military and you're not allowed to annex any territory whatsoever. And Hitler essentially said, well, I'm going to. So what should have happened was Britain and France should have said, no, you're not, got their armies together, gone down there, whipped up on Hitler before he got all this power, and it would have been over. But instead they go, well, you know, they are kind of German there. And maybe it was a little harsh that we took all their land away. Let's just let him have it, and then he'll be satisfied, you know, kind of like giving a baby a pacifier. You're not really solving the problem, you're just making him shut up, right? And so they agree to his demands. Here's the problem. They don't ask Czechoslovakia. They don't ask anybody there. Hey, do y'all want to be a part of Germany? No, he just takes it, okay? Of course, this is a very slippery slope, and it leads to many more issues like this because they want to avoid a war. And unilaterally, they just say, hey, there you go. Hitler, you know, they're scared he's going to, you know, get mad and try and start a war over this. So they're like, well, it'd be better just to avoid war. Give him what he wants and he'll stop asking for stuff. The problem is that he's a megalomaniac who's insane and wanted to dominate the entire world. Right? So no matter how much you give him, he's never going to be satisfied. Once Hitler starts doing this, and he starts to take over more and more land. He claims the Sudeten land, which had been taken from him. He does all of these things, and he, you know, annexes Austria. He marches his military in the broad daylight. He doesn't even try to hide it, and nobody does anything. So he's just empowered over and over and over. Hey, I can do whatever I want, which you can't just let somebody do that. But we see the rise of militarism, which is basically the glorification of war in your country. That a nation, it's the idea that if a nation has a strong military and strengthens their military and stockpiles weapons and preps for war, that it makes your country stronger. And you can see why. It's basically a bully ideology. And so how do you accomplish militarism? Well, you have to start from a young age. Building off of people like the Spartans and ancient societies that we've talked about, where the entire country is built around the idea of having a strong military, and that gives you strength. He looks at him and goes, well, how did they do that? And he realizes it's something you must start from a young age. So he begins something called the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth. It's kind of like the Boy Scouts for hating Jews. Right? Essentially. But it's really, starting in the mid-30s, you're training young men, 6, 7, 8 years old, that the Nazi Party is the only thing that can make you better. That, look, we're getting stronger as a military. People are taking us serious as a country. We're back to the old Germany, and this is how we do it. And the leader, Adolf Hitler, is the reason why. And so you're training these people to glorify him. And then by the time you get to 1940, right, these kids are getting to fighting age. And now you have an entire country who's ready to fight in your war. Every single kid. Okay? And so, it's this idea that, you're going to build it up and you're going to turn it into a perfect society where everybody is part of the military, and that is where your strength lies. Another major factor to the buildup is the fact that the U.S. was completely isolated. After World War I, they actually put together, the Roaring '20s is a great time economically. It looks like we're having a great time prior to the Great Depression, obviously. And Europe is so far away, and they've been going to war with each other for hundreds of years. It seems like to Americans that no matter how many people get killed over there, no matter what, they're just going to keep fighting with each other, and we don't want any part of that. The United States says, we're going to do our own thing. We're having a good time over here. We're really growing. We're doing good for ourselves. We're not going to get dragged into your war. It's also made worse by the fact that they have this idea. They put a committee together following World War I called the Nye Committee. And the Nye Committee basically was a committee that investigated how did we end up in World War I to begin with. And what this committee comes to the conclusion that they come to is that we were actually tricked into joining World War I by arms manufacturers who wanted to make money, and British and French propaganda and conspiracy theories. Now, this is kind of crazy, but remember, we joined World War I following the Zimmerman Telegraph that was given to us by British military intelligence and said, hey, look, they're going to make Mexico join Germany and they're going to attack you. And the British told us this, and we were like, and then we put it in the papers and everybody was like, yeah, join. And what the Nye Committee basically said was that, along with a bunch of other stuff, just riled people up. We should have never joined World War I. That was their problem. Was Germany and Mexico really going to, just because they send a letter to Mexico doesn't mean Mexico is going to join them, right? We done whooped Mexico a bunch of times. You think Mexico really thought they were going to go to war with the United States and turn out okay? And that's kind of what they're saying. Now, again, this is conspiracy theory stuff, but Congress, these guys actually said that, like, out loud. And so I'm just trying to explain to you what the conspiracy theory was and how these ideas were like, hey, we're not going to get tricked again. So we see all this stuff happening in World War II, and the British and French are like, hey, U.S., what should we do about this Hitler guy? And we kept telling them, well, that's your problem. You figure it out. Well, the British and French are going, well, if we don't have the U.S.'s backing, we're not going to war with this guy. Give him what he wants. We're not going to go to war if the U.S. isn't going to back us up. Give him what he wants. Give him what he wants. So part of that idea of appeasement was because of us, too. because we were going to be unwilling to help if the British and French stood up for themselves. They were going to do it on their own. Well, they didn't want to do that. And so they took the idea of appeasement, definitely part of us as well. And so that's kind of going to come back to bite us in the butt, for sure. Because we kind of ignore all the signs that are eventually going to drag us into the war anyways, and it's really kind of our fault because we didn't have to ignore them. Where eventually Hitler ends up with some partners in this. The Axis partners here, you have Italy, Slovakia, Croatia, Finland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Japan. They all kind of are going to end up teaming up with Germany in this. And they're going to be known as the Axis powers. All right, then you have the Allied powers. Once all of these people all have, treaties and stuff together, the U.S., Canada, Brazil, the Russians, France, Poland, the U.K., China, New Zealand, Australia, India, South Africa. But understand, South Africa, India, New Zealand, Australia, those are all countries that are controlled by Great Britain. They're not actually their own countries. So obviously it makes sense that they're involved with the British side because they're controlled by the British. And once we kind of have all of these treaties set, Hitler's going to do some stupid stuff and kick off World War II. Okay? Everybody good? Kind of see where we're at.